Imagine having the dream job, or so everybody else thinks.
There were 3 years in my early 30s where I made over 7 figures in W-2 income.
A 7-figure payroll as a Wall Street investor, and then leaving it all, becoming a content creator.
So I never thought of myself as a creative person. I'm an engineer. My dad's an accountant. My mom's a French teacher.
My guest today, Khe Hy, did exactly that. We're going to hear his story, the lessons he learned, and why we need to hear about changing the tempo of our busy lives. Let's go to it. Welcome back to the show, everybody. I'm Andrew Gray, your host. Thanks so much for taking the time to tune in. We've been having some incredible guests on the podcast recently, and we've got another great guest today. My guest's name is Khe Hy, and he is a man with an incredible story. He grew up in New York, and he'll tell you more about that himself. But he's got a great story to tell about pivoting in career and how to make a change. And it's just a thrill for us to have you on the show with us today, Khe. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It is a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. Now, I want to dive right into your origin story, and for my viewers and listeners to hear some of your background, your backstory, particularly bringing us up to the first half of your career. And then after that, let's get into some ideas around this major pivot that has got you where you are today. But tell us more about your backstory and where you've gotten to.
Perfect. Well, like I said, pleasure to be here. So growing up wasn't fun. We were lower middle class. My parents were first generation immigrants, and it wasn't not fun because of that, but my parents moved to New York in 73 with $500 and a job.
Wow.
So they were always able to put food on the table, shelter over our heads, basic needs always covered, but we were outsiders. Right. This was in the early 70s in New York. There's not a big I'm Cambodian. There's not a large Cambodian community in the United States. This is in the midst of the Khmer Rouge regime, unbeknownst to me at that time. I'm born in 79, and basically skinny, shy, awkward kid with parents who were still learning how to assimilate in New York City. And for some combination of grace or bad luck, but I just never felt comfortable in my skin. Like I said, I was very shy. I was the kid that hid behind. I remember grabbing my dad's legs like tree trunks whenever we went to a stranger's house. I felt very I lived in a relatively safe neighborhood, but I felt very unsafe going to school. Had been mugged 3 times going to school. So every day was scary going to school.
Wow.
And most importantly, no girls liked me. And so, much of my kind of adolescence was just kind of blah and a little disheartening, so to speak. I wanted to be cool. I wanted to be respected. I wanted to be liked. I wanted to be loved. I wanted to be seen. And just none of those things were really happening for me. But I had a secret weapon. My secret weapon was that I was really freaking smart,
right,
and really hardworking.
Okay,
like I was selling comic books in the black market, when I was probably 8 years old, making like hundreds of dollars.
Wow, amazing!
Like I knew how to take mundane things that an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old would never see, and turn it into money. And so I hatched up a plan. I was like, this loser kid is no longer going to be a loser anymore. Watch me all.
Right.
I'm going to put my head down. I'm going to study my ass off. I'm going to learn how to make money. I'm going to learn how to invest. I'm going to get a great job, and all of you will be worshiping at my altar at some later date. So that's the starting point. I took that energy. I translated that. I went to Yale for a computer science degree. Graduated. I worked in investment banking for 2 years, and then I spent 12 years in a derivative industry of the hedge fund industry called fund of hedge funds, where I had an incredible career culminating to my resignation at age 35. I was one of the youngest managing directors there, promoted at 31.
Wow. Amazing. And then there's so much we could unpack just from that part of the story, but we might go forward and skip back a few times as well. Take us into what I referenced earlier, this major career pivot where you've been, as you said, in finance and banking and hedge funds and all the rest of that world, which is a very unique world to be in. And then you made this very, very major pivot mid-career, so to speak, to what you're doing now, where you're speaking and training and coaching and teaching, and you've got YouTube channel and you've got over 50,000 readers on your newsletter, and it's a whole other world. Talk to us about that pivot and take us behind the scenes of your thinking of that moment.
Yeah. So I was very fortunate through that sheer determination, good luck, good timing to have a great career on Wall Street.
Right.
There were 3 years in my early 30s where I made over 7 figures in W-2 income. At the same time, I was investing religiously. Right. I just set myself up for a very good life and really indebted to my parents
right.
For kind of putting me on that path. However, with every success, the high of the success became shorter, smaller, and smaller.
Wow.
And so I'd had great, I bought a New York City apartment at age 27, right? I had 7-figure payday at age 30, managing director. I'm not being dramatic, but within hours, sometimes, the high from that achievement would evaporate.
Amazing.
And I would instantly go to, well, that person made more, or I'm not fulfilled. What's my purpose? Or let me get back on my iPhone or BlackBerry because 18 people have emailed me with an urgent request in the last hour, right? And so I started to realize, I use an analogy. It's like the first time that I got stoned, I was 18 years old. And I was staring at a factory and it started to move like one of those Star Wars, like the things with the giant legs. I was like off of 2 hits of a joint. Then, I'm not a big pot smoker anymore, but that will never happen again.
Right.
And to get to that, just to maintain that level of high of euphoria, I just needed more and more and more. So I started to display this behavior of kind of an addict when it comes to success, needing bigger successes just to maintain the baseline of happiness and satisfaction. Right. Somehow, some part of me, I felt so lucky. They were like, Khe, this playbook that you have put in motion since you were 7, 8 years old, consider for a second that it might not actually be the playbook you want to play out the rest of your life. And I was like, oh, damn.
Wow.
Because I had literally invested every single drop of energy from age 8. Now I'm 35. So 27 years of literally, this is all I can think of.
Wow.
And it's like, what if this is, I'm not downplaying getting to that point.
Sure.
But I'm considering, do I want to do this for the next 10 years? And I look at people who are 10 years older than me. A lot of them were in unhappy marriages. Some of them, their lives look exactly the same. Nothing had changed.
Right.
A lot of them were really unhealthy, drinking problems, hair loss. I mean, I have hair loss too. So,
but doing better than you in that regard.
I'm not going to flash my crown in the camera, but, and I started to say you know what? That's a great life, right? I could just draw that line. It would be a steep vertical line of net worth, of income, of cars, second homes, all that. I don't want that.
Right.
What do I want? I want to own my time.
Right.
I want to walk around life with a pep in my step. Always. I want to do fun things. I want to surf. I want to create things. And I want to travel. And I want to be at peace. I want to bring an ease into my daily existence, not just the 10 days of vacation. I would
Sure.
take a year, 15 days of vacation. And so I did what any rational human being would do. I'm like, fuck it, I quit. No plan.
Uh-huh.
I just said, I quit. I had an 18-month-old. Now I have 2 kids. My wife is an artist. And I say that because in the United States, that means you don't get health insurance.
Right.
So I quit without a plan other than I trust myself. I trust these tools that got me this far.
Right.
To figure it out.
Wow. That's amazing. Wow. Where do I start? Let's start with the bravery, I guess, or the courage. If I can reflect back to you what I heard, as you said, you're already very successful. You've got a young family. You're in a stage in your career at that moment where the traditional line of thought is keep on going, get more, do more, achieve more. But then you make this massive pivot. Talk to us for a moment, if you can, especially to my listeners and viewers who are men, who might be in a similar stage in their life where they maybe have reached a point where they don't love their career anymore, or it's not fulfilling them the way they hoped it would. And somehow they're searching for and wondering whether they can locate the courage and the bravery to make a step like this. Could you talk to us about that internal machination for you of, I guess, identifying that internally and committing to cross that line and say, I'm doing it. I'm not just going to think about it.
Yeah.
I'm actually going to do it.
Yeah. Wow. There's so many levels to which to answer that question. So at one level, I'll speak to you about my rational brain.
Sure.
Right. So I appreciate the kind words you said about courage and bravery, but I had a lot of savings. And so what I did is I spoke to my wife and we're like, how much do we spend each month? We looked at that number and we're like, how long do we want to give Khe this like midlife crisis experiment? We said about 18 months.
Okay.
And we just literally took that money from account A, put it in a different account, and it was like, are we okay with this number going to 0? And again, thankfully, we had enough of a financial buffer. It was like, if that we didn't want that number to go to 0, but if it did, we would be fine. So that's a rational thing that we did. Okay. Another rational thing that I did was I was very well connected in the industry. I think I was liked and respected, and I didn't burn any bridges.
Right.
So I told everyone honestly, no, I'm not tricking you. Like, I genuinely need a break. I want to do something different. I didn't speak downly to what they were doing. I empathized that this could be a very triggering decision for a lot of people. So I tried to be empathetic about that. And here's the thing, is like, I didn't think it was that risky, because if the 18 months went by, I was very employable. Right. I mean, it's not like 18 months. Yeah, you might need a little, like a shine of fresh paint to get up to date with with what happened. But like, we're not solving, cancer here. You know, we're just watching these investments. Some of the investments, they didn't even change. Right. There was like private equity stuff. They didn't even change over a 1-year period. Right. To this day, I still get offers to return to the finance industry, by the way. So this is 9 years later. So that was the rational part of my brain. But I don't think you were actually asking the question about the rational part of my brain. I think you were asking about the heart. Yes. And the soul and the ego. And I don't know. So I'll tell you one thing. One thing was, people always say, wow, that's so risky that you did that, walking away from all that money without a plan. And something in me said, well, you know what's riskier is having a child watch their dad go through the motions of life just for money. True. So that was one way. The other way was I really felt like I owed it to myself. Like it's almost like I don't think I could have lived with myself if I had just continued to go through the motions. And I think I'm a little crazy like that. I think it takes a little screw off to be an entrepreneur, because yes, you always say, well, just one more year, one more bonus, one more this. Right. You can't really think of things in terms of opportunity cost, risk return. Like, it just, you need to let the soul speak a bit.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I want to pick up a phrase you said there because it really spoke to me, and I think it will speak to those who are watching and listening. You said, I knew that I couldn't have lived with myself if I didn't make this change. And it made me think of a phrase that you have on your newsletter sign-up page that says, and I'll read it here, your bucket list matters more than your to-do list. And I'm curious to hear from you just that process that went on where you made that call, you acted on that inclination of, I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try this. In the aftermath of that decision, did you find that the creative, different version of you that we're talking to today, was that guy always in there and kind of suffocated by a traditional model, or did he emerge because there was some breathing space? How do you position that?
That's a good question. So I never thought of myself as a creative person.
Okay.
I'm an engineer. My dad's an accountant. My mom's a French teacher.
Okay.
We're very kind of traditional path kind of folks. My parents are very, very risk averse. So I never thought of myself as creative. And I think that there's this like romanticization of the creative. Like maybe back in the day it was Hemingway with a cigarette hanging from his lips and writing outside a cafe in Barcelona, on a random Tuesday, kind of drunk, just cranking out beautiful prose. And maybe today it's more of like I know he's, maybe not the example to lean on, but like a Kanye West that just defies all the rules and wears a, black mask over his head and, just like kind of the crazy creative. So I never, ever saw I still don't see myself in that way. But I think that I was always, so there's two parts of me. One is I am one of the most consistent motherfuckers you have ever met.
I love it.
And like, I just give you a few examples. I have probably exercised 5 days a week since I was 16 years old.
Amazing.
And I'm 44.
And looking good for 44.
So feeling good at 44. I've been writing an email newsletter for 500 consecutive weeks.
Wow.
I've meditated almost every day for a decade.
Amazing.
I've only been away from my kids in this new chapter at night, 50 nights in 10 years. I refuse to travel. So I'm a very consistent person. And I think there's a real downside to this, and we may talk about this later. So I have, the James Clear thing, like it's not 1% better every day, but it's like 10.1%.
Yes.
I'm a big believer in that. I didn't know how to surf 5 years ago. And now I would say that I'm like a pretty good surfer.
Okay.
I've also surfed 1,400 days in the past 5 years. So I know how to show up.
Yeah.
That's one thing. The second thing is I think I do have a little bit of the screw loose in certain ways. And so when you have that screw loose, but you show up, usually people that have the screw loose have trouble showing up.
Right.
I've found. But I have the screw loose and I show up. Yes. So it kind of takes me in these like fucking weird, meandering paths, right? Like I just recorded a solo podcast episode where I replayed moment by moment a guided psychedelic experience that I had a year ago from memory. Right. No notes.
Right.
Is that normal? I don't know. Like, I think it's normal.
What is normal?
Exactly. So I to answer your original question, no, I didn't feel creative, but I knew that I showed up.
Yes. Tell us about that fusion.
I'm passionate.
I agree with you. There's a lot of stereotype and perhaps unhelpful stereotype around what is a creative and who are they and how are they wired and all of these things. But I hear you pairing the creativity and the consistency and those two being friends. Talk to us about that in a way that perhaps people don't understand.
Yeah, well, there's this story about Picasso where he goes to, he's in a cafe and someone says, hey, can I can I buy a piece of art from you? And he draws something on a napkin and slides it to the person. You'll be like, that will be, $10,000. And like, $10,000? That just took you 5 seconds to make. He's like, no, that took me a lifetime.
Right.
So I think about, I do think that, let's see, I think the creative act is a lot less sexy. Like if you look at Picasso's repertoire, I don't know much about him, but he was prolific. That I know. Prolific in the number of paintings that and illustrations he did. So I think people think that creativity is like this Newtonian moment where, Andy Warhol sits under a fucking apple tree and then an apple falls on his head and all of a sudden you have soup can, the famous soup can print. Right? Andy Warhol. Also, Andy Warhol was an illustrator in women's magazines illustrating shoes out of college or high school. I forget if he dropped out. No one talks about that part of Andy. No. They just think of the soup cans.
Yes.
And furthermore, with Andy Warhol, because it's pop art, modern art, they're like, that wasn't even hard. It's like, but you didn't see the illustration. So I think there is this myth that creativity just strikes you out of the blue, right? Yes. And you look at like Mr. Beast, right? He would drop out of high school or skip high school and he would be on 16-hour Skype calls with 4 friends where they analyze YouTube videos for 16 straight hours.
Right. It's wild.
No one talks about that, right? And so I do believe that the reps, and I take a more scientific approach to creativity, which I think might limit me in some ways and make me shine in other ways. But I take a very incrementalist approach. It's like, well, I wrote something today and tomorrow I'll write something. I just want it to be a little bit better. And if you repeat that for, 100 times, then it'll be pretty good. Yeah. I think some people are a little bit more bold and meandering and destructive and vibrant. I don't think you would use those words to bold, destructive, vibrant. I don't think you would use those verbs to describe me, my creative style. Mine is much more, I would say it's incremental. And I think there's something very unsexy about that. But I'm doing this for the long game. It's been 9 years. I plan on doing creative work until my body can't handle it anymore.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, amazing. I think there's so much in that is fascinatingly encouraging. Whether people are a creative, whether they view themselves as a creative, whether they're left brain, right brain, however they see themselves, there is a fascinating body of work and therefore encouragement to everyone that, there are the occasional outliers who seem to just pop out of nowhere and their brilliance amazes us all. But for the large majority of those who succeed in entrepreneurial pursuits, creative pursuits, and even more traditional career pathways, it seems to me that by observation, consistency is the winner, doing the reps, turning up. And what I hear from UK and what I see is it's not just task-oriented, it's passion-oriented. So consistency matters, but you got to love what you're doing, right?
Exactly. And I just want to, I want to come back to that, but I want to reiterate to your listeners. So I'm 35 years old. I've barely taken any English or literature classes in my life. So writing, I'm a computer science left brain. I analyze quantitative hedge funds. 9 years later, I'm a quote unquote writer. I actually still struggle with that, but I'm a writer.
Yes.
35 years old. I quit, like zero following, never done anything online.
Yep.
9 years later, 50,000 followers, like blah, 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 blah. When I was at BlackRock, I used to get criticized. I was one of the top people in my division, but I would get criticized for one thing. You suck at public speaking.
Wow.
10 years later, I'm doing hour and 30-minute YouTube videos, no script, no editing, one take.
Right.
It can happen.
Yes.
Right. I didn't have any of these things at 35. I had the consistency muscle. I had the fuck it muscle, but I didn't have the public speaking muscle. Right. I didn't have the writing muscle. I didn't have the social media, whatever skill that is, muscle. So it's possible.
Amazing.
If you're listening, it's possible.
Totally. And from my perspective, I think those internal undergirding muscles are far more important. I think if you can develop those over time, they can actually be applied in a multitude of directions and pursuits. And we certainly see that from you. I'd love to hear from you about the birth and the journey, if you like, of Rad Reads, your newsletter. I've looked through many of your articles, and I find great synergy there and resonance with your approach and the kind of subjects you're talking about. And you and I know this connection, but for those who are listening and watching, one of my recent guests was Anne-Laure Lecomte, who is a PhD neuroscientist who is in a similar kind of space, helping people to think more clearly and challenge their traditional ways of viewing life and doing experiments in your thinking and all this kind of thing in order to achieve greater outcomes. Could you talk to us about the mechanism or the vehicle of your newsletter, and then talk to us about the body of work that it carries, challenging people to think differently?
Yeah. So, wow, where to begin on that question? So, one of the quotes that I love, it's what my podcast is named after, is Socrates said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." And I know that when I was on that Wall Street, go, success at all costs, burnout, speed bullet train, there was no time for examination. On top of that, I grew up as a child in a culture, an Asian culture. I take it a step further, a culture that is still suffering from the downstream consequences of one of the worst genocides in history.
Right.
I grew up in a culture where people, men in particular, do not talk about their feelings. They do not talk about their problems. They do not cry. They bottle it in. There's a lot of alcoholism in the community. They bottle it in. They stuff it deep in their souls and hope that they can outrun that pain. So that's the baseline that's the world that I grew up into.
Right.
And again, through some act of grace, some stroke of God, that and I say God, I'm not a religious person, just in the spiritual sense of God. There was something in me that awoke and said, "You can't. This is not how you live your life." And I think that's ultimately, I think deep inside, that's the subconscious push that's like, you got to get out of Wall Street, because there's just this entire, you're like a horse with blinders, and all you can see is that one narrow line of sight in front of you. And there was just some part of my soul that knew that, there was, that Vegas orb thing, the circular concert. There's like this 360 panorama view of beauty and stimulation and colors and love that you just can't see with these tight blinders on. So, so my newsletter has always been the vehicle. All of my creative work has been the vehicle for that. But here's the thing, Andrew. When I left, I didn't even know that.
Right.
I didn't know that. And again, through some stroke of God, what I felt like doing in that 18-month period, remember we talked about that?
Yep.
Was I'm just going to share that I'm confused.
Wow.
And I had no followers, nothing. I mean, this was before, to put this in context, this is before Instagram stories existed. Okay. Right? This is how long ago this was. I'm just going to share that I'm confused. And there's all these paradoxes. Like, I should be happy because I have this amazing career, but I'm not satisfied, but I'm not depressed. And my relationships are good, but I want them to be better. But I don't feel like a sense of purpose, but I don't want to be a philanthropist. And I like to have fun. And I like to party, but I also like to be contemplative. Like, all of these dualities weren't working for me. Right? I like to party. I'm a hardcore extrovert. and I could spend weeks by myself.
Right.
So am I an introvert or am I an extrovert?
Right.
Right. So I could work my ass off and I love to chill.
Mm.
Like, so none of these dualities were working for me, and they were causing a lot of internal conflict for me, because I was being fit in. It's like, oh, you're a father, so you must do this. You're 40, you must do this.
Right.
You're a man, you must do this. You must be the primary breadwinner, et cetera, et cetera. None of these boxes were working for me. And so I just wrote on my medium.com blog with 0 followers, like, I'm confused.
Amazing.
And it's almost like I put out the bat signal.
Right.
Because people are like, you know, gurus have always said stuff like this.
Yeah.
But when you looked up their profile, you're like, oh, you know, snowboarder, internship on Wall Street, like when they were 16.
Yeah.
And then, you know, whatever, works at a restaurant.
Yeah.
Like, you're not, that's not a guru.
No.
And I don't want to be a guru, but some people view me as a guru.
Sure.
People who self-identify as gurus need to get their heads checked.
Yeah.
But I put out the bat signal, and they're like, wait a minute. This guy is like me. My kids are the same age. I'm the primary breadwinner. I've been on this path. I feel dead inside. I think like my empathy made me a really good writer.
Yes.
Because I could say things that people are like one of the best compliments that I get to this day is like, it feels like you're in my head.
Right. Yeah.
And so that was the writing. And so I just started a newsletter, and I just did that 452 weeks later, still doing a version of that. Since then, I've added on different things. I added on a podcast. Yeah. I added on a YouTube channel. And what I love in this is that there is this very pragmatic side of things. Like, how much money do you need before you quit?
Right.
So I interject myself into this question, but it's actually not to tell you how much money, because it's just a different number for everyone.
Sure.
Right. But then I get you hooked with that question. And then I'm like, when was the last time you felt alive? And you're like, whoa. Yeah. Wait a minute. Like, I thought we were talking about personal finance here. Or financial independence, retire. When was the last time you felt alive? Right. Or is your marriage seeping with resentment? Yeah. Right. These are like real things. Like, you know, I'm 44. I'm at the age where people are getting divorced. Like, we're not going to weddings anymore. We're going to second weddings or divorce parties. I've never been to one, but I've heard they happen. So I was willing to go there with writing that was incisive, but also playful and, you know, that like deals with, like, I would use a Drake quote in a serious article about, you know, marital problems. Right. Or I'll use the Spider-Man meme whenever I, you know, have the ability to use it. Right. Yeah. So it didn't take itself too seriously, but it was still very incisive. Yes. And it knew who it was talking to. Yes. Right. I'm not talking to a 25-year-old single woman in Paris. Just like, that's not my audience. There might be a few, but that's not the core of my audience. And so I had a really deep understanding of that, which fostered this ongoing connection.
Yeah, amazing. Beautiful. I love the way that you're saying that. And, you know, when I look at your writing and I listen to you, a phrase that I would possibly attach to you, if I may, is I would call you an empathetic provocateur.
I like that.
You find resonance with your audience, which, you know, in my opinion, has always been a qualifier. People who stand on stages or seek to deliver content, if there's no resonance with the audience, or if someone is purporting to be so far ahead that they're out of touch, I think it's a disqualifier. But what I see and read from you is that you seem to hit that mark really well, that correct and appropriate point of, yeah, I might be ahead on some things, but I'm still paddling in the same canoe as you are, which is highly attractive to people, whether you're speaking or writing. And I think your fulcrum moment, as I'm hearing it, this idea of the unexamined life, I think is such a powerful, powerful thing that listeners and viewers to this particular episode can adopt for themselves. They don't have to be this or that or some version or some brand of copycat, but they can take inspiration from that kind of process that you've described you went through. And I would totally agree with you. That quote, the unexamined life is not really one worth living. If we're not stopping and asking ourselves, why do I do what I do and the way that I do it? And does it matter? And do I care? And is it what I want? Is that the kind of thing that you would be regularly challenging people in a positive way to contemplate?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, the empathetic provocateur. I mean, I'm going to run and see if that domain name's available or that Instagram handle.
You go for it.
Yeah, I think so. I will say first that we live in a society that doesn't encourage examination.
Yes.
And if anything, we're really swimming upstream because, I mean, we have a very, I'm speaking more on the behalf of American society at this point. Sure. I don't know Australian and European as well, but we have an escapism.
Yes.
It's like, if you're not happy about this, there is a way to escape. It could be alcohol. I mean, look at the things that are being legalized in America.
Right.
Weed, gambling. It's just, if there is an escape, if there's a way to escape the current suffering that one feels, we're going to find a way not only to make it really available to you, but to find a way to make fucking money off of it.
Exactly.
Right. And so we live in a culture of escapism, and it's really hard to fight that trend. Look, I hate that I love TikTok. It's just like, it's like putting drugs into, I may have never put drugs into my veins, but I imagine it's like putting drugs into your veins. It's just like, God damn, this feels so good. More. And then I have a timer on mine, but like 15 minutes, like, what the fuck did I just do?
Right.
Yeah. And I see the escapism, like I see it even with news, like whether you're right, you're left, like you can always be angry about something and just, you can numb yourself. So I would say that there's a starting point that we're swimming upstream, which makes this mission even more noble. So, you know what I mean? I don't want to get on my high horse, but it makes it more important.
Yes.
The other thing, though, is that human beings suffer.
Yes.
Right. And here I'm going to tap into, some of the Buddhist non-dual readings and learnings that I've done over the years. Human beings suffer.
Yeah.
Right. Why do we suffer? Because I mean, ultimately is because everything fades. Right. And again, different religious traditions will have different, but in a secular world, everything fades.
Yeah.
And that's not an easy truth to accept.
No.
Now, the examined life is much more than the acceptance that everything fades and everything is impermanent. But I think the impermanence of everything is kind of the waterfall that feeds a lot of this suffering. Maybe you suffer like you're scared of aging, or maybe you're scared of losing loved ones, or maybe you're scared that you'll be a speck of dust and no one will talk about you in 50 years.
Yeah.
Right. Or maybe you're dismayed by all the unnecessary suffering that's in the world. Maybe you're terrified by the capitalist engine and how it's destroying the beautiful resources of Mother Earth. Right. A lot of that is probably downstream from the impermanence of life.
Yes.
Right. And so when you come back to the motivations of things, it's like, whoa, like, how can you understand your motivations if you don't have some kind of reckoning with that universal truth?
Yeah.
Right. And so this shows up in many silly or sad ways. I think about, so let's take the private equity industry, right? Private equity is like mints. I read today, it has minted the most billionaires in like the shortest period of time of any industry ever. Private equity, great business to be an owner in. No, not so great for your quality of life, but one of the pioneers of private equity is a man named Thomas Lee. He did one of the first big leverage buyouts, Snapple, I think in the mid 80s. He kind of pioneered the industry. However, people behind him came along and they had so much more success, maybe on the coattails of his success. So I think Thomas Lee is worth, like $1 or $2 billion. I mean, let's remember $1 or $2 billion. Steve Schwartzman, who's probably the granddaddy of private equity, is worth hundreds.
Yes.
Thomas Lee, purportedly, this is what I've read in the press, was very unhappy that he was not getting all of the recognitions and the financial rewards from the industry that he is credited for starting. So at age 76, I think, he puts a shotgun in his mouth in the bathroom of his office.
Wild.
With an 18-year-old son from a second marriage. Or
Wild.
20, young son. Right? So that's an extreme example, but I give you another version of that example. They had this study where it said, we get the numbers wrong, but it's like, would you rather have 1.5 times your income, but your peers have 2 times their income? Or would you rather keep your own income the same, but your peers have half their income?
I'm not sure I want to hear the answer to this.
More than 50% of respondents said the second one.
Wow.
So more than 50% of people would rather see their peers be worse off than them than everyone be better off.
Wow. What a sad indictment.
Yeah. Yes, and that's human nature. True. I mean, if you go to any spiritual text across any denomination, something has been commented on this type of phenomenon.
Absolutely.
Also known as greed.
Yeah, that's right.
But, and so the wiring, I give these examples to show, like, I'll admit it, like when friends have success and I don't, sometimes I'll be like, yeah, but I'm more fit, or yeah, but his wife doesn't like him.
Right.
Just to make me feel better about myself in that moment.
Yeah.
Why? What's happening there?
Right.
There's a lot of internal strife. And what I have come to passionately believe is that there is no peace while that internal strife reigns supreme.
That's true.
And I don't believe that you can eliminate that internal strife. But goddamn, if you don't examine your life, that internal strife is definitely not going away.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly right. You've put that so well. And it really is the significant nucleus point, isn't it? To do the examination, to stop, to take the time, to think, to be contemplative. It is fascinating what you said there before about the escapism, and our cultures between Australia and America are not that different in that regard. I think much of the world is similar in that regard. And, I've been working in this kind of space that we're discussing for almost 3 decades now. And the phrase that I use for it is I talk about it being pain medication. Not all escapism is unhealthy, but an awful lot of it is because of the way that it's contextualized for people. And they take some of those things of life that can be enjoyable pleasures when they're kept in moderation, but they get used as pain medication. And it is reflective, as you say, of the fact that the soul is broken and people are in pain. And one of the steps to redressing that, it's not the whole process. And, you and I both know we're not here trying to give a one-size-fits-all diagnosis to the whole of humanity, but one of the steps in the process has to be examination, to stop and ask oneself, Why is my life the way it is? How did I get here? And to realize that pretty well everybody, except for a small percentage who are unfortunate, and we need to change that, but pretty well everybody has some degree of agency and autonomy and power to change their life. And it's part of why I love what you write and the way you approach it, because it comes back to that phrase that I used. I think you are an empathetic and positive and resonant provocateur to get people thinking. And I think for people like us who are in the zone that we're in with creating and sharing ideas and challenging people, if we can achieve just that, getting people to think and to contemplate and to examine, well, we've probably done a good thing and made a contribution to their journey. We're almost out of time, but I do want to ask you one more question before we run out of time, and that is for you to be more explicit and more direct with my listeners and viewers. People who are leaning in to this conversation and are leaning into this idea of the need to examine. What advice would you give to that person? What should they do? How should they go about it? How do they get started in examining their own life?
Ooh. All right. So the first element that I would say, kind of the environment that you need, the water, the oxygen that you need, is some capacity for stillness.
Right.
Now, this doesn't mean meditation per se, but here's something that I know your listeners would resonate. How many of us can not go for a walk or get in their car without turning on a podcast or music?
Great question.
Right. I know I have to force myself. If I drive, I live in LA, so we have these long drives to go to a dinner or something.
Yep.
One drive, podcast, music, drive back, silence.
Right.
That drive back, the silence is so, not even once I'm in it, but just to be okay with that silence. So because if you think about it, especially with social media and just everything, the packets of information have gotten so much smaller.
Yes.
And we're just hurled. I think so. There's we read 1.6 versions of War and Peace every day in digital format. So come on, guys. So having a vehicle for stillness, right? And again, it can be meditation. It can be walking with no headphones. It can just be sitting quietly and observing your breath. Just from there, the volume starts to quiet down. Right? The volume starts to quiet down. And so from there, there's no shortage of questions one can ask.
Yeah.
Right. And so maybe you could write the question, you could say, am I happy? Right. What would happen if you spend 10 minutes stilling your brain and 10 minutes with a pen and an analog piece of paper saying, am I happy? Or what does success mean to me? Or do I love well? Or who gets my best energy? Or what would I want someone to say at my eulogy? Or what is something that I want to do that I'm not doing right now, and I know I have no excuses?
Yeah.
Or what would I do if I knew that I would never be judged? Right? It goes on and on and
Great
on.
Questions.
And, I could give you a lot of those questions are in the book, The Artist Way by Julia Cameron. Right. Which is funny because we started the conversation around the topic of creativity. So, it is a book about tapping into your creativity,
Sure.
but the message of that book is you don't tap into your creativity unless you tap into your true sense of self.
Yes.
Right. I think one question that your audience would love is, I'll give two, but one is, who am I without achievement?
Mm-hmm.
And another one that I've been asking people often is, if I knew that no additional achievement would change my baseline happiness,
Mm-hmm.
how would my life change?
Right. More great questions. People need to do this, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what happens is you start to internalize them.
Mm.
And so you don't actually have to sit down and write them. You're like, one of my questions is what makes me come alive?
Okay.
And so I have this kind of like permanent antenna
Mm-hmm.
for alive. You can kind of think of it as like one of those, volume meters.
Yeah.
Where it's like, it's like when it gets perpetually too low on the aliveness, what's the opposite of aliveness? Dead inside.
Mm-hmm.
When it gets a little too strong of a reading of dead inside.
Yeah.
I check in with myself. Okay, what's going on? Usually it's because I'm trying to achieve something that someone else thinks is important and I'm not completely sure is important to me.
Yeah.
Right. Borrowed goals. Someone else's goals.
Right. Yeah. Amazing. You framed that so beautifully, and everything you've said there for everyone watching and listening is so actionable, and a great live example of the empathetic provocateur in action. Really positive challenge for people. Look, I have thoroughly enjoyed our conversation today. Thrilled that you could join us on the channel and on the podcast. Thank you so much for being with us, Khe.
The pleasure is mine, Andrew, and thank you everyone listening and watching. It's truly been an honor.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, we will make sure that all of the ways to connect with Khe are in our show notes and our description, where to sign up to his newsletter. And I urge you to do that. Follow his social media and various platforms. You'll get a lot of positive provocation, as we talked about, from following him. We'll make sure we do that. If you're not subscribed to my channel and the podcast, why don't you go ahead and do that? And also, you can connect with my newsletter there. We're out of time for this episode, but until next time, bye for now.